The decision is a majority draw.
Make sure y'all stay on point with
The Puncher's Point. What is good, y'all? Welcome back to The Puncher's Point. First of all, there must be a full moon out here, okay? We must have hit the Bermuda Triangle because on the same day that John Cena turns heel after 20 years in the WWE, we get a draw between Gervonta Davis and Lamont Roach. Lamont Roach, 25-1, 10 knockouts, not known to be a power puncher at all, goes in there, outpunches Tank, rocks him, possibly gets a knockdown, which nobody called for some reason. We'll get to that later on in the episode. And somehow we get a majority draw. 114, 114. Two out of the three judges had it. 115, 113. One judge had it for Tank Davis. Now, I'm going to tell y'all what I thought about that fight. I had it 114, 113. Tank Davis. And the reason why I had it that way is I'm gonna say this. So the reason why I had it 114, 113 is because first of all, I don't care what these judges said. Tank Davis had a knock. It was a 10-8 round in my opinion. When you take a knee, that is a knockdown. When there is a knockdown in boxing, you're getting a 10-8. I don't care. So I don't care if the ref didn't call it a knockdown. I'm calling that a knock. That's a 10-8 round right there. Anybody else who took that knee, if that was Lamont Roach, switch the situation around. If that was Lamont Roach, he gets a 10-8 round. I don't want to hear it. So you know what? That's a 10-8 round for me. And then I feel like Tank from 10-11, I feel like rounds 10-11, they kind of switched. They kind of flipped between the both of them. And then I had it pretty even through 11. Round 12, I edged it to Tank Davis. That's how I had it. Y'all might have it differently. Please, in the comments, let me know who y'all thought won this fight. But overall, let's get to it. Gervonta Tank Davis versus Lamont Roach. What did both guys do well? And what did both guys not do so well at? And on top of that, let's get through the grading. So with that being said, let's start with the strategy. In my opinion, I think both of these guys had a strategy. I think both of them stuck to it for most of the fight. And then there were some parts of the fight where I think they leaned away from it. So for me, I'm going to give the strategy an 8.5. The reason why I'm giving an 8.5 is because, first of all, both of them had a great strategy. I think Gervonta's strategy, again, it's always start slow, kind of collect your data. And in the early part of that fight, don't get me wrong, it looked like Gervonta Davis was kind of starting faster than what he originally does. I'm not saying he was absolutely like just full blown, like pedal to the metal in those first 5 rounds, but he was picking up the pace a lot quicker than what he did against Frank Martin, which is something that a lot of us been saying that we want to see from Tank Davis. What I liked about Tank Davis is I think he went to the body a lot, and don't get me wrong, I mean Tank can get you anywhere, but overall, I really did like how he went to the body a lot. I also like how he was he was still using that intimidation factor that he uses against a lot of opponents, which was basically, kind of charge forward, force them to kind of drop their guard. And there were moments where he would kind of try to crack that Philly shell of Lamont Roach. Now, as far as Lamont Roach, what I really liked about him, Lamont Roach, what I will say this, first of all, before we say anything, shout out to Lamont Roach. I mean, the toughest fight that Gervonta Davis had before this was Pitbull Cruz, but shout out to Lamont Roach because Lamont Roach, he went in there when nobody thought he was going to do anything. I had a 6th round knockout, Tank Davis. I did not expect Lamont Roach to go all 12 rounds, let alone split decision or a draw. I did not expect that. So shout out to him. But with the strategy, Lamont Roach, I think he did a very, very good job of basically just having a high output in punches. One thing I said about Lamont Roach was he was very, very versatile. And he showed that against Tank Davis. He didn't give Tank Davis one look. And that's what you got to do to beat some of these big names in boxing. Guys like Tank, guys like Canelo, guys like anyway, you cannot keep giving them the same look. Some of these guys just keep on giving them the same look. What I liked about Lamont Roach as well is he kept everything short. He didn't go in there. He wasn't going in there and throwing 50 million punches with no defense. Every single time he threw a punch, that guard came back up. Every single time he threw a punch, he just made sure he had that guard as tight as he possibly could. And he did a great job, honestly. I feel like I feel like when he would throw it, the jab was very effective. Even though that high percentage, it wasn't really landing, but overall, I feel like he did a good job of knocking on the door, so to say, basically kind of just tapping the guard a little bit, testing his range. But overall, when his jab would hit, I mean, it would land. I wish he threw the jab a lot more. Now, going back to Tank Davis, what I wish Tank Davis did a lot better at was I feel like Tank Davis was a little too cautious in this fight. And first of all, this fight it was weird because Barry Hunter was the lead trainer instead of Calvin Ford, and I think that had something to do with the reason why this fight wasn't going in the favor of Tank Davis because Tank Davis and Calvin Ford, I mean, they're like this. They have a very, very, very close relationship. I mean, Tank Davis is like a father figure to excuse me, Calvin Ford is like a father figure to Tank Davis. So when you have another trainer coming in there telling you what to do, and you're basically shrugging off Calvin Ford like Tank was doing a little bit, I think that was a bad idea. I feel like in those types of moments when the fights are getting close, you need to listen to somebody like Calvin Ford, opposed to Barry Hunter. Not saying Barry Hunter didn't have a good game plan, because he did. But overall, I feel like Tank Davis wasn't as aggressive in this fight as he was in others. And on top of that, he wasn't as accurate in this fight as he was with others. The one strength I said that Tank Davis had was precision. And I feel like there weren't many moments where Tank would land effective counters. And there were some moments where he would try to throw a counter and he would miss and he would give away his game plan. He would give away some of those counter attacks that he had. So I feel like Lamont Roach did a very good job of not only just testing the space, but also be kind of being the smart aggressor, having that balance. Like I said in the prediction episode of aggressiveness and cautiousness, having that balance. He had that balance. And I think that is the balance you need to beat Tank Davis. So, with that being said, overall, both of them had good strategy. The one time Lamont Roach kind of slipped away from that strategy is when Tank was talking trash to him. Then he tried to get a little bit too aggressive. And because of that, Tank had some opportunities to land some good punches on Roach. For two of those rounds in that fight, he Tank was kind of getting into his head. But then, shout out to Lamont Roach's father and trainer, Lamont Roach Sr. He said, "Look, stop doing that. Stick to the game plan. Look, you can set up those punches. You can set up your counters. Don't worry about what he's saying. Block that out. Block all the chirping out. Just make sure that you go in there and you stick to your game plan." And Lamont Roach went right back to the game plan. A lot of guys would have tried to make it a battle between Tank. A lot of guys would have tried to match fire for fire with Tank, and a lot of them would have got careless and knocked out. Not Lamont Roach, and that's what I give him a lot of credit for, and that's what I give his corner a lot of credit for. Now with Tank Davis, Barry Hunter would try to tell him something. Calvin Ford would try to tell him something. I feel like there were too many voices talking at Tank Davis at that time. He was kind of chirping at the ref a little bit. I feel like both these guys kind of got away from their game plan a little bit because they were frustrated. Tank a lot more in this fight. So overall, I got to give that an 8.5 for strategy. Now, as far as excitement, I'm going to be honest. This even though there wasn't really an official knockdown, this fight overall was really exciting. And in my opinion, I got to give it a 10. I mean, we're talking about a fight that was very, very close. Both guys were engaging. It had the boxing style that you wanted and the strategy that you wanted. This was a very, very exciting fight, and it was a lot more exciting than what a lot of people thought it was going to be. A lot of people expected an exciting finish, but overall, I mean, it, overall, both of them didn't do that bad, and honestly, they made it a very, very exciting fight in Barkley. So I gotta give it a 10. Um, a part of me wants to drop it down to a 9 because it started off so slow, but that's how tank fights are. But overall, not every fight is going to be action packed from round 1 to round 12. But regardless, I give it a 10 because it had you on the edge of your seat. There were moments in this fight where I'm looking, I'm like, oh crap, like Lamont Roach is really piecing up Tank. And there were other moments in this fight where I'm like, oh, Tank's about to get this knockout on him. It's only a matter of time. And we were all waiting for it, but it just never happened. So I just think the suspense, the anticipation, and not only that, but the action in this fight is good enough to make it a 10 out of 10. Now, as far as the stakes that were on the line, you got the WBA lightweight championship on the line. And during this time, I mean, besides that WBA lightweight championship, this was a fight to basically put in front of Tank. He takes care of business and then he moves on to the next guy. But hey, let me tell you something. Lamont Roach had a lot on the line too. We're talking about a guy who was the super featherweight champion, and he had one loss on his record, and that was to Jamel Herring. And it's not the best loss to have in your record, like I said. But Jamel Herring was built a lot differently than Tank Davis. He was a lot taller, a lot more rangy. And after that Jamel Herring fight, he just went on a roll. He just went on a streak. And so basically, when it came to Lamont Roach, there were some stakes on the line for him too. I mean, you can make yourself a big name at 135 if you give Tank a fight. Frank Martin, all right, he made himself a name when he made a fight with Tank Davis. So There were some stakes on the line. Honestly, if it was just for the WBA lightweight championship, I would have given maybe like a 7.5 or an 8. But because there were also stakes on the line for Lamont Roach and he delivered, I got to bump it up to an 8.5, honestly, in my opinion. I think that that's what this fight deserves because I feel like Lamont Roach lived up to his standard that a lot of people wanted him to, that a lot of people didn't think he was going to live up to. And Lamont Roach, he was a very likable opponent in the build up to this fight. You know what I'm saying? I didn't see anything wrong with anything Lamont Roach was saying. He was very calm. He wasn't like a lot of opponents that Tank Davis had where they get all flustered and riled up. He kept it cool, calm, collected. In that ring, he kept it cool, calm, and collective. And overall, I tend not to listen to like Joe Goosen or Shakur Stevenson. Shakur Stevenson was like, it's a 50-50 fight. I was like, okay, Shakur, whatever. Joe Goosen was like, you got to make sure that you got to make sure you do this, and that against Tank Davis, and you got to make sure that you have to have the right balance. You got to be athletic, all that stuff, good chin. I was like, okay, Joe Goosen, but they were right. They were right when it came down to this fight. It was a 50-50 fight. It was a lot more 50-50 than what we thought. And on top of that, Joe Goosen was right. You have to have a good chin. You got to have athleticism. You got to, bring the fight to Tank Davis. You can't. They were both of them were right. So shout out to them as well. But as far as the stakes, WBA lightweight championship on the line, Lamont Roach has a lot to prove. He was trying to become a simultaneous multi-division champion. So I give him a lot of credit for stepping up. So yeah, 8.5. And then last but not least, impact. Well, how does this impact the sport of boxing? Now you got another guy competing for that top 10 pound for pound list. I mean, Lamont Roach, I think this fight is enough to put him on that list because he did give him a great fight. Honestly, when the next rankings come out, I wouldn't be surprised if Lamont Roach is on this list. So I think it does have a big impact. On top of that, Tank Davis, for the first time, looked like a legit human. And again, I got a new name for Tank Davis. It's called DRAWVONTA Ty Davis. That is his name until he can get that until he can get that type of redemption, until he can kind of rewrite that wrong. DRAWVONTA. That's what I'm gonna start calling it, DRAWVONTA. And look, it's all fun and games, I mean, Gervonta Davis was here. He'd probably say like he smacked the bleep out of me, or whatever. But overall, Gervonta it is. So as far as the impact, a lot of other fighters are going to start looking at Tank Davis and they're going to start saying, well, he's beatable. We see some flaws. We see some flaws in that game that are finally starting to show. It took a long time. It took 31 fights, but they're starting to show. So overall, Lamont Roach, he really did make a name for himself tonight. He really did. And I know he's probably not happy with the draw, but I mean, shout out to Lamont Roach. He really did make a name for himself today. And Tank Davis, I mean, he's got some things to clean up in the drawing board. In the next fight, I want to see Calvin Ford be the lead. Now, with that being said, I gotta give the impact. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm giving the impact a 9. And so, with that being said, when you add it all up, this fight is ranked 9 out of 10, an exact 9 out of 10. You want to know what that ranks on our card? That is the number 2 fight for season 4. It is right below Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol 2. It is right below it. So that's Tank now. Tank versus Lamont Roach. That is the second graded fight that we have graded so far. And honestly, these fights have really been living up. I mean, out of the last 4 fights that we've graded, 3 out of 4 of them have been in like the top 5. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Riyadh season 1, that was a long card. We had a lot of fights to grade, but overall, these fights really have been living up. I mean, Benavidez and Morrell, Beterbiev and Bivol 2, Usyk and Tyson Fury 2, Gervonta Tank Davis and Lamont Roach. Yeah, you really look at it and I mean they're living up. They're living up to the hype, And I mean overall this has been a good exciting year for boxing. So 9 out of 10, I think that's a perfect place to put it, honestly. And overall this fight was really good. The 9th round might go down in history as one of the greatest rounds, one of the most controversial rounds in boxing history. And last but not least, I didn't touch up on it on the strategy, but I do want to touch up on it now. Do you see what happens when you do not stay on the ropes the entire fight against Tank Davis? When things get tough, do you see what happens when you don't lean to the ropes? You can actually strategize. You actually have some space to move around and counterpunch and jab and basically get out of harm's way when you don't put yourself on the ropes. Okay? I was tired of seeing it, and I said I was going to lose it if it happened next time. So shout out to Lamont Roach for not laying on the ropes when things got tough. And overall, in the clinch, both of them, I mean, they did a great job of, just pushing the pace, especially Lamont Roach. He was like, I'm not going to get bullied in here. He looked like the bigger fighter in moments. He fought like the bigger fighter, but overall, again, I'm going to break it down. I had a 114, 113 Gervonta Davis. I had Gervonta win this fight. Either way, both guys got robbed. If somebody said, hey, I had Lamont win this fight, I could see it. I'm not going to argue with you about it. Obviously, there's some good points as to why both of them would win this fight. But overall, I think when you really break it down for me, 114, 113, Gervonta Davis. Now, if I go back and watch the whole fight, I might have a different reaction, but I think 114, 113 is fair, honestly. So, with that being said, what's next for both of these guys? Obviously, they got to run it back. You know what I'm saying? They got to run it back. Lamont wants to run it back. Gervonta Davis wants to run it back. So that's the next fight I expect. Now overall, there's not a lot of room for Gervonta Davis to keep on making tune-up fights. You got to get this rematch with Lamont Roach. And on top of that, you said you don't have much left, or not that you don't have much left, but you don't have much time left in the sport of boxing because he wants to leave and, be more of a family man and kind of focus on himself personally, which I respect. So, yeah, you get that rematch with Lamont Roach. If you're able to learn from your mistakes, I expect this to be a lot different of a fight. Same thing with Lamont Roach. If he kind of just decides to pick up on some things, kind of just decide to tweak up a few things, maybe Lamont gets the upset. Who knows? But overall, you got to get that rematch from Lamont Roach. And then obviously, I would like to see him before he retires at least unify one of those 135-pound belts or go up to 140 and try to become a champion in another division. As far as Lamont Roach, if somehow he does get this win against Tank Davis in the rematch, I expect him to stick at 135 and try to fight some of those guys like Keyshawn Davis, Shakur Stevenson, Lomachenko. I would expect him to try to go after some of those guys. It's going to be really hard, but overall, maybe he goes up to 140, tries to challenge Gary Antoine Russell. Shout out to him, by the way, for becoming a new 140-pound champion by defeating Valenzuela. So shout out to Gary Russell. But overall, we're going to have to wait and see, obviously, like we have to do after every single fight. But overall, this was a great fight. Shout out to both guys for fighting all 12 rounds. Shout out to Lamont Roach for basically proving everybody, including me, wrong. And overall, just another exciting tank fight. So, with that being said, make sure y'all continue to tune into the Puncher's Point. I'm gonna make sure that I start getting the reels uploaded again. I apologize for not being as active as I would like to be. Overall, some personal things came up I had to take care of first. But here we are, we're back, and expect this episode to be released on YouTube, all podcast platforms. Don't forget about the reel that gets posted after all of that. Don't forget about the magazine. And overall, just make sure y'all continue to stay on point with the Puncher's Point.